My name is Reed Aronson. I am a matrimonial lawyer here in New York City.
And I'm Vanessa Aronson. I am Reed's wife. I am not a lawyer, but I'm here to learn, just like all of you.
Here to learn. So for today's episode, so the purpose of this live cast is to help people out if they're going through a life event, if they're having any sort of big changes, getting divorced, getting married, having kids. We've been asked if Gilda is okay. Gilda is fine. She has a little trachea collapse thing that she coughs a little bit about, but she's okay. And so we're trying to do is help educate people about what their rights are and what the process is going to look like if they're getting divorced or if anything is happening in their lives like that, and maybe arm people, or if not if then, maybe your friend or a family member, just to sort of arm you with the information that you might need for that. And we've spent the last few weeks talking about custody issues, the cast of characters in custody cases. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about money again. Specifically today, we're going to talk about, as you can see back here, business valuation. And by the way, if you miss any part of today's episode, or you want to just review it, see it again, we post everything to YouTube, Unhitching our YouTube channel. Please head over there, give it a like, give it a subscribe, check out our past videos. I'd really appreciate it if you could give us a little bit of support that way.
Yeah.
So today's topic, business valuation. Very exciting topic. It's a dry look. So business valuation is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's how do we put a number on the value of a business? Okay. And a business can be lots of things, right? My law practice is a business that could be valued. A restaurant is a business that can be valued. I can name lots of businesses. This feels like a Michael Scott lecture at business school, right? Lots of things are businesses. Who's McCall or whatchamacallit? But really, it's important, right? Because oftentimes in a lot of cases, either the most valuable asset or one of the most valuable assets is a business, and you can't necessarily sell it, okay, right? Because think about it, right? Because maybe that's the only way somebody makes money, right? Like I can't sell if we were to get divorced, and I am hoping that we don't. If we were to get divorced, I can't sell my law practice. It's the only way I make money. But you're still entitled to some amount of it, right? You're still entitled to some value for it. And that might be with a lot of people. Or, by the way, if it's the biggest asset, there might not be enough cash to pay it out. So you've got to you got to figure out what it's worth. And the question is, how do we do that?
So you were sort of sharing that there are a lot of things can be considered businesses. But what is the line? Is it something, I, for instance, work at a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. That sounds like it's not a business. But other people might work at a business. That wouldn't be considered a marital asset. When is it considered a marital asset and when is it not? So
the concept of, if we're talking about the legal concept of owning something,
okay,
right? Like that's what it is. It's an ownership interest in something.
Okay.
Anything, right? In an ownership interest in this remote control, right? Like theoretically, the remote control is worth something. If all you do is you go to work, not all you do. Sorry, that sounds like I'm diminishing it. I don't mean it that way. But if you're a W-2 employee, you go to work every day, you earn a salary. If the business gets sold, you don't get any interest for that. Right? You don't get any money for that. You don't get to necessarily direct the course of events that you can make recommendations, but you don't have the right to say, you know what, we're going to sell it, or we're going to go bankrupt, or we're going to burn it to the ground.
Right.
Right.
So the distinguishing factor is, in the easiest terms, when someone created and founded and owns their own business, that is clear. But then the line is sort of, are you a W-2 employee, or do you own a partnership or a stake in the business? It's
the easiest way is, do I have an interest in the profits and the losses?
Okay.
Right? That's the quickest way to look at somebody. Is this a business or just a job?
Okay.
Right? Do you have a right to the profits and the losses? And if you have a right to the profits and a responsibility for the losses, then you're an owner.
Okay.
Right? And there are lots of different ways that people own things, but that's the big deal.
Okay.
So normally the way that we go about this is that We present to you the facts of a case, a real case that happened, and you try and decide sort of how it went. And I normally have a cute little video, but unfortunately because of the technical things, we won't have a video today. But we're also not going to do a real case today.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I thought that this was a difficult enough topic and a sort of a dry enough topic that I wanted to make sure that I kept the facts as simple as possible.
Okay.
And sort of as clear cut as possible. So I'm just gonna give you the hypothetical.
Okay.
And know that this is a hypothetical, but so that we can sort of talk and talk about how things get valued.
Right.
So here's the hypothetical. Cecilia is she does karate, and she's a black belt in karate, and she's married to Dave, and Dave is an airline pilot, and in the days that Dave is off, she decides, you know what, I want to start a business, and the business is going to be a karate dojo, and I'm going to teach kids, and I'm going to get money from their parents from tuition, and that's how I'm going to make a living for myself.
Okay. Can you explain what you mean by on the days when Dave is off?
He's just away. I'm just assuming
okay.
he's not.
Okay.
I'm just getting him out of the picture so he's not part of the business.
Okay.
He doesn't work there. It's her business.
It's her
She goes and she gets a bank while they're married. She goes to the bank and she gets a loan for some money to start her business, and she uses that money to start her business, and she's very successful. Very successful. Within a few years, she's paid off that bank loan, and she's making she's now got 10 people working for her, 10 other employees who are teaching classes or running the door and all that sort of stuff. And she's still working, but she makes in profits $250,000 a year.
Okay.
Okay, and that's what she takes away from the karate dojo, or so it's very successful. I imagine that's very successful. That's got to be a lot of students, the whole thing. So $250,000 a year in profits, and she takes none of it as salary.
Okay.
So she doesn't pay herself a salary. Just at the end of the year, she looks and she sees, okay, what's left over in the bank account after we've paid everybody? It's $250,000 a year, like clockwork. She takes that out, she puts it in her bank account, and that's how she's making it. Okay?
Okay.
So now she and Dave are getting divorced.
Okay.
And the question is, how much does Dave get in recognition for the value of this dojo business, of this karate teaching business?
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you is, how do you think you would start trying to answer that question? By the way, I'm setting aside what percentage you might get. Set that aside. But just we got to figure out what this thing's worth. And so, what do you think it's worth? How would you go about that conversation?
Okay, wait. So yeah, backing up. The question right now is just, how do we value the business? Not anything to do with Dave yet.
Not anything really to do with Dave. We know he should be getting some portion of the value of it, right? Because they were married and he contributed to the household. We talked about that 5 or 6 episodes ago, right? It's a marital asset. This dojo is a marital asset. He's entitled to some portion of it, but how much is it worth? Because if it's worth $1 trillion, right, he's going to be getting a lot more than if it's worth nothing.
Okay.
So how do we figure out if it's worth $1 trillion, worth nothing, or somewhere in between?
Okay. So now I'm trying to think back. We actually have not watched this show in a long time, but we used to watch a lot of Shark Tank. And when the contestants or the business owners would come looking for investors, they would be sort of judged on how they valued their business. And so I'm trying to remember how the heck they did that. Well, it certainly has to do with their balance sheet of debt to profit. And in this case, you've said that she has no debt. And the profits are $250,000 a year.
All right, so let me maybe if I can let you get started. So I'm not asking you what but the starting point, and this varies a little bit by state, some nuance to it, but the general concept is really the same no matter where you are, and that is, what would somebody agree to pay for your interest? Okay? So what would a willing buyer on the open market looking to buy a dojo, how much would they be willing to pay Cecilia for the dojo, right? For the business that is the dojo.
Well, it would, okay, so again, you would have to look at the fact that she's made profits plus plus what she's actually paying her staff, her employees, space, other fees, right?
Right.
So it's just the total of.
You're hitting the nail on the head, right?
Okay.
Ultimately, somebody who's buying this, what they're going to care about when they figure out how much they're willing to pay is what's the stream of profits that's coming in. This is an operating business, right? This is not just a pile of gold sitting in a bank somewhere.
Right.
This is an operating business. What it's worth is the money that it's generating, the profits that it's generating.
Right.
And you'd say, okay, what do I think this business is going to make in profits? Based on its track record, based on all sorts of things.
Based on
over
projections.
time, based on projections, over time. How much do I think it's going to be worth? Okay? And you then, the concept of discounting for present value.
Yes.
Right? $100,000 10 years from now is not worth $100,000 right now.
Right.
So you do something, you discount it, and you can discount for risk too.
Okay.
Right? Because let's say that there's a risk that the dojo is going to collapse in a couple of years, so you're going to take some money off for that, and you sort of back it in, and you say, okay, here's what it's worth today, based on what I think it's going to be worth, and the risk that I'm taking over time by being in this asset, rather than buying a pot of gold and sticking it in a vault somewhere.
Right.
Because gold goes up and down, but more accurately, like U.S. Treasury bonds, right? U.S. Treasury bonds are worth something. I know what I'm going to be getting. Whereas a dojo, I don't know necessarily what I'm going to be getting. I think I'm going to be getting something, but there's some risk there. And so I'm going to take a little bit off the top because I don't like that risk.
Right. Okay. So
that's
agreed.
So that's the notion, and it's called in general terms it's called fair market value.
Okay.
Okay, fair market value. Now there's also a concept called fair value, and I want to stay away from jargon as much as I can because it becomes very difficult to get through. But there's two basic, but they're both based on the notion of somebody comes in and wants to buy this company, okay, or buy your interest in this company. What are they going to pay? Now, let me ask you something. Let's say it wasn't a dojo. Let's say it was my partnership. Let's say it was a law partnership. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You can't really just sell a law partnership, right?
Right.
Because, first of all, only lawyers can really buy it. Partners are not necessarily going to want to work with just anybody off the street, right? They're going to want to, sort of have somebody who is going to be a lawyer and going to be working and doing stuff. So does that mean that the value of a law partnership is really worth zero?
Well, no, because isn't a partnership is a stake in the firm, and theoretically, aren't there other partners who might want a larger, so you wouldn't necessarily, your audience to sell it, or your market to sell it wouldn't necessarily be the average person on the street, but it would be how much the other partners are willing to pay for the.
That's an excellent point, right? It's still an operating business that's generating money over time. So there's still a value to being a partner.
Right.
And that value is something that would get split up in a divorce in some way. Okay? So maybe you'd say it's worth a little bit less, right? Because it's harder to find somebody, or it's not so easy to sell. It's not like a pot of gold easy to sell. But it's still worth something.
Absolutely.
Okay? Now let me change the hypothetical a little on you.
Okay.
Let's say instead of a dojo, she owns a house flipping business. Cecilia is a house flipper.
Okay.
And what she does is she buys distressed houses. If you've ever seen one of these shows, she fixes them up and then she sells them at a profit.
Right.
And some years she makes a lot of money. Other years she doesn't make so much money.
Right.
It's not really necessarily consistent, and it all kind of depends on a little bit of luck and a little bit of having a good judgment in one year versus another year.
Right.
Now, maybe over an average year she makes $250,000, but who knows how much she might make in any given year. Do you think that you go about valuing that business the same way?
Yes, but I would think that they, and but I would think that you would take into account more the housing market projections, whereas the dojo market projections are probably a harder thing to predict, whereas housing market projections are a thing that people are constantly trying to predict.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that in the portion of a year, right, so sometimes she's going to have houses that she's working on, other times she's going to have none. In the portion of the year where she owns no houses, do you think that business is worth anything? What is she selling? Who would buy it?
Without her, right?
Well, they're buying the business, right? They're buying it. They're just buying it away from her, right? Would that be worth anything? So I think the answer is kind of it depends.
Yeah.
But really not, right? Right? Yeah, she makes approximately $250,000 a year, but she doesn't have any. There's no infrastructure there. She doesn't have a dojo. She doesn't have a bunch of teachers who are coming in. She doesn't have a client list that's coming in every year and paying that yearly tuition because their kid wants to go from this belt to that belt to this belt. It doesn't have that sort of a flow to it. It's just sort of, she buys an asset. She improves the asset. She sells the asset. So for a business like that, you're really not going to look at cash flow. You're really going to just look and see what are the assets that she owns and how much is it worth. Right?
Well, what about, but there's value in what she's proven she can do, right? So she's proven that she can buy a house and put in whatever creative, productive, like organizing the people to get the things done, that she creates that value, and she's proven over however long that she's had the house flipping business that that's value that she can create.
Excellent question.
When her spouse is no longer married to her, he no longer has that value anymore. So there is something, it's less tangible, and frankly, it's maybe even more versatile and maybe even more resilient because the inherent value is in her versus a dojo and the facility and the neighborhood and the whatever. So there's actually in some ways maybe more value when it's something that she can pick up and take anywhere.
So that's an excellent point. So let's say somebody came in and said, I want to buy your house flipping business. Are they going to buy that house flipping business if she's not a part of it?
Probably not.
The answer is no, right?
Right.
The answer is no. The value of that business is in what she does and what she can do.
Right.
Okay? Which means that somebody coming in and buying it is going to have to lock her into some sort of long-term contract.
Right.
Right? Because she's not getting the benefit of it anymore. Right? Theoretically, right? That's if the ownership is the entitlement to profits and the responsibility for losses. And if you're taking her out of that, you're going to have to pay her something to make her stay there.
Right.
So how much is that? Probably about $250,000 a year, right? Because that's what it seems like she's worth.
Right.
So plus, by the way, $250,000 a year plus whatever it is that the houses that she currently owns are worth, because those are assets.
Right.
So the point that I'm making is that for some businesses, not dojos, but for some businesses, the value isn't necessarily in the income stream. The value is in the assets that they have, because everything else is sort of ephemeral, right? It's going to be gone once we buy it.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a third hypothetical.
Okay.
Okay? She doesn't flip houses. She's running an internet startup company. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly what they do on this internet startup company. They're a clearinghouse for computer services. I don't know.
Okay.
It's an internet startup. It's they have a very nice office with an open layout. Everybody plays ping pong all day. It's very fun. But internet businesses, they don't make money. They lose money.
Okay.
Right?
Do they never make money?
Never make money. but like, it takes a long time usually before they're
Right.
profitable. Oftentimes, right, like Facebook took a very long time before it figured out necessarily how to monetize. So this is a new social networking site, right? They've got a ton of people, a ton of users, a lot of people on that platform, and they're very excited about their future. But right now, they're not making money, right? They're taking an investment,
Right.
and they're spending it, and they're year to years losing money. Is that business now worth nothing?
Well, no. Again, if we're looking at it, if the definition of what it's valued at is how much someone is willing to pay for the business, so long as the internet startup has investors that are willing to invest in it, which is technically buying a share of it, it's worth whatever the investors are willing to put into it.
You get that. So an investor in a business like that, somebody who wants to buy into it, is not going to look at the profits and the losses. I mean, they will, but that's not going to be the be all and end all. They're not going to say, oh, you're losing $1 million a year, therefore your business is worth negative $1 million a year. No. What they're going to look at is they're going to look at the potential. They're going to look at what is the possibility for a business like
Right.
this. So how you would go about valuing a business like this is you look either at what did people invest already? What were the other rounds of investment? Oh, somebody bought in for, to buy 25% of it for $100 million.
Right.
So maybe it's worth $400 million.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't be worth, it's not a dollar to dollar like that, but we won't get into that. But, you say, okay, 25% is $100 million,
Right.
times 4, $400 million. Let's say you have a situation where she owns 100% of it. She got a really big bank loan. They got a $10 million bank loan. And they've been running on this $10 million bank loan, and now they're getting divorced. So what is that business worth? How might you figure it out? You might look at comparable companies that have sold. So you might say, you know what? You are a social networking site about, let's say, for music lovers. I guess that's MySpace, but for music lovers, that's your niche. It's all about the independent music scene. Well, we can look at a book of publicly reported transactions, and this is not something I would do. This is something an expert could do. We literally have a book, and we say, okay, well, independent or independent music or music social networking sites have sold historically for X, Y, and Z. And usually it's a multiple of revenue, right? Not necessarily taking into cost. You don't need to get too far into that, but just know the concept that you're going to look and you're going to see what other businesses like it have sold for in the past. And then you're going to say, okay, using that sort of formula and plugging our company into that formula, here's what it's worth.
Right.
And here's what a fair market value would look like. Okay? So what we've sort of gone through now is the three major ways of valuing businesses. And one of the big questions that you'd ask an expert for any given business is, what's the right one for this business?
Okay.
Right? Because not every business is necessarily going to fall easily into a bucket. Some businesses will, but some businesses are more tricky. So one of the questions is not just what is it worth, but what's the method that we're going to go about valuing it for?
So someone comes to you for, that they're getting a divorce and they have a business interest. What should they be, they come to you, they say, hey Reed, I've got this dojo business. What happens next? Is it something that they need to be figuring out the value, that they need to be working with someone else to figure out the value? Is that something that you help them do? Or like you said, there are experts. How does that process work?
So the first thing that you're going to do in anything like that is you've got to get information, right? As much information as you reasonably can gather.
And by you, who are you talking about? The lawyer?
Look, I don't have it. It depends on who it is, right? If it's the person who owns the business, you're going to go to your CFO or whoever that is, and you're going to say, okay, I need the financials. I need to know our profit and losses. I need to know our balance sheet. I need to know all of that stuff. And you'll get it to somebody like me. And then I'll look at it and I'll understand it somewhat. And I'll be able to say, look, I think that we need to hire an expert. And we go to somebody who's called a forensic evaluator.
Okay.
And that person is then an expert. They'll be able to really look and dig into, okay, what is the discount that we're going to apply because of time? What is the discount? What is the risk? How do we look at that in this context, right? Because it's a hypothetical exercise at some level, right? You're trying to get into the mind of a potential buyer, and what you need for that is somebody who has experience.
Is this something as a forensic valuator, something that all businesses need, or is that so? If somebody has a business interest and they're getting divorced, is it automatic that they need a forensic valuator, or is that something that you can help them determine if they need?
It's absolutely something a lawyer can help determine, right? Somebody who has experience doing that stuff and looking at this information, right? Because, like I said, let's say it's the house flipping business. I would argue you don't need a forensic evaluator for that. You need a real estate appraiser, right? Because the value of that business is what is the real estate worth,
okay,
right? If you have a different kind of business, let's say, but it really would depend. Look, maybe your business is really small and it's just not generating that much yet. Maybe it's not worth that much. Maybe it's a real startup. Like, we just opened on the corner and we're not making any money and we don't know if we ever will make money.
right,
Maybe it doesn't make sense to hire somebody because it's just not really worth anything.
right.
So it really is about talking to your lawyer and talking them through where you are to sort of figure out what your next steps are.
Okay.
All right. And I don't see that we have any questions.
Wait, no. I have a million questions.
You have a million questions.
Okay, that's it? Okay, so back up.
The basics of business. The basics of business valuation.
Business valuation. I keep wanting to say evaluation.
Well, we did talk about custody evaluation. This is
Okay. First question. Are we not going to talk about Dave and what Dave gets?
I don't care about Dave.
Okay.
Non-contributing spouse, Dave gets between 15 and 35%.
Really? Okay. So, all right, we're not going to talk about what the other spouse gets right now. I would imagine that's like the most important thing that people are worried about, right? If they have a business, they're going to be worried, how much is my spouse going to take from me?
Absolutely, but in my look, you said Shark Tank.
Yes.
There's somebody on Shark Tank, I think it's Mark Cuban, who talks about having 10% or 100% of a blueberry versus 25% of a watermelon, right? I'd much rather have 25%. I mean, maybe you don't like watermelon, but having a smaller percentage of a big thing is going to make a bigger difference than having what percentage you get of a small thing. So the bigger fight tends to be, depending on the business, of course, and all of that, but the bigger fight tends not to be about the percentages. It tends to be about the overall value of the business interest.
Oh, interesting.
Right, because you can get a huge range. You can have two different experts who come in, and one might say, I think this business is worth $3 million, and another might say, I think it's worth 30.
Wow.
And there's no difference in percent, right? The difference between 100% and 0% of 3 is not as big as the difference between 10% and 35% of 30. Right? So the oftentimes the overall value of the business is going to be a bigger dispute. And also, frankly, it's a little bit easier to, within a range, to sort of spitball the percentages. Right? I can look at a case pretty easily and get some basic facts about how things are going and what's going on and tell you, like, okay, you're going to be within 5 or 10% of this. Whereas you give me a business, and like I said, you might have two different people who come in with vastly different values. So starting out and figuring out what's the business is worth is often the more important question than what the percentages are.
Interesting. Okay, that's really
just in terms of overall.
That's
value.
really enlightening. On that note, then, so when someone owns a business interest and is starting to think that their marriage might be headed toward divorce, what should they be doing, and how does what you just shared, sort of that the value of the business is more important than the share that the spouse could potentially get, like, how does that implicate things? I could imagine, like, now the world you're creating or highlighting for me, to me, paints a picture in which now suddenly, unlike Shark Tank, I want my business to be worth as little as possible.
Look, that's the tension, certainly. There's a tension there that comes up in every case. And look, ultimately the facts will out, right? The numbers are going to be what the numbers are. You should never be doctoring your books. You should never be doing anything like that. So the numbers are what they are, but there is sort of a funny, not paradox, but a conflict there, right? That you might have in a case, right? If somebody runs a business, you might have their divorce lawyer on this side of the street telling a judge, the thing is not worth much. It's got all these issues. There are all these risks involved and all these problems, and we don't think they're going to make as much money this year. Whereas you might have your, the guy, your CFO on the other side of the street talking to a potential investor and saying, oh, it's worth a lot. And of course, by the way, all of that stuff ultimately gets over to that side of the street.
Okay.
So another thing you shouldn't be telling your lawyer is stuff that is going to end up being proven false.
Okay.
Because the most important thing that you can have in a case is for you and your lawyer to have credibility.
Okay.
Now that doesn't mean you can't make arguments, and that doesn't mean you can't push things in the way that you think is right. But if you're telling your lawyer, oh, this thing's going down, it's the worst business in the world. But in the meantime, you have a prospectus for a potential buyer talking about, oh my God, we're just about to close this huge deal. We're just about to sign up 50 new huge clients and all of that. And that prospectus or that document ends up with the judge. You're never going to be believed again. So credibility is important. And the other thing this is something we tell clients a lot, is you shouldn't let the tail wag the dog.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now look, there's always going to be corner cases and edge cases and all of that, but generally, you should run your business to be as successful in your business as you can. And trying to run your business in a way to sort of tamp it down pending a divorce, look, am I going to tell you that it's never worked in history? I'm sure that it has. But ultimately, you're going to be putting the bigger question at risk, right? So in order to save, 20%, in order to save the watermelon or the, whatever the percentage is, you ended up hurting your business. You're not gonna make it up in the long run, right? Like hurting your business. If you're gonna get 65% of your business and your spouse is gonna get 35%, yeah, maybe you say, well, I'd rather it not be worth. I'd rather pay her less, but don't hurt your business, because you're eating 65% of the downfall.
Yeah, right. What about on the other side, when it's a business that is in debt and a business that, we talked a little bit about startups, and that's one thing. But what about a business that's really on its way out and circling bankruptcy? How does that impact the other spouse? Do they have any responsibilities?
Absolutely. Look, if marriage is an economic partnership, right? It's an emotional partnership. It's a physical partnership, and it's an economic partnership. And if you're going to be expected, or if you're going to expect to get some percentage, if it's worth something, you have to understand that to the extent that there are liabilities, those are going to go against you too. Now look, what percentage of those liabilities is going to be an open question? Let's say that right before the divorce, some spouse goes and says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just start throwing debt onto this company because I know, she'll have to pay a portion of it.
Right.
A judge is going to see that. And a judge is going to say, just because you knew 2 days before you were about to get divorced and you went and you borrowed $1 billion, no. And first, also, by the way, if you get $1 billion, you're going to have $1 billion in the bank. So taking a loan out is not necessarily bad, but don't try and play dirty tricks like that. But look, if you've got an estate that's worth a certain amount of money, and the business that this guy is dealing with has debts and has to pay those debts, that's going to be taken into account, and it has to be. Because look, if I have a business that's right now worth, negative $1,000, and you're saying, well, and then everything else in the estate is worth $1,000, I literally wouldn't, I get nothing. That doesn't strike you as terribly fair, right? Maybe you think it would be fair.
Okay, another question. Who ultimately decides what it's worth?
The judge.
The judge. Okay.
Or a judge makes that decision, and one of the things is thinking about, right, is where are you going, this is a different question, but where are you going to file for divorce, right? This is something that we as lawyers think about, because we know, for example, that the matrimonial, so let's say that you have a house in Manhattan and you have a house upstate. The judges upstate, nothing against those judges, but they are just not going to have as much experience dealing with these sort of complex valuation questions that a judge in Manhattan is, because it doesn't come up a lot. Right. If my client runs a hedge fund, right, the judges in Manhattan have dealt with probably more hedge funds maybe than I've dealt with, because it just comes up so much in their method practice on their docket.
Right.
Whereas a judge up in, say, Clinton County, there's not a lot of those businesses up in Clinton County. There are fewer people up in Clinton County, so you might have to spend more time and energy, and again, sort of educating the judge. And I use that again not to denigrate those judges, but just in the sense of anybody is dealing with something for the first time, they're going to need to be a little bit more informed.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, is when we elect judges, we think of usually their legal expertise, and this is really interesting that they're part of their purview, if they're going to be working in a matrimonial court or deciding matrimonial cases, is now suddenly potentially being the decider, well, not potentially, being the deciding factor between $3 million versus $30 million, which
being a matrimonial judge is very hard. And I say that in case anybody of you are watching, and I can, but it's very hard, and you have to be, an expert at some level, or at least a base level in child psychology, in adult psychology, in financial, in how to read a balance sheet, in how to understand, evaluate these valuation principles. There's a lot that judges have to deal with, and so, if you can not pick your judge, but pick where your judge is going to be, and that these are places where they deal with these kind of issues, right? Look, I mean, frankly, what if you were valuing a farm, right? You might not want to be in Manhattan, because a Manhattan judge may never have seen a farm, in terms of valuing it, whereas maybe a judge in Clinton County deals with it all the time.
Right.
So it really is a question that you want to ask when you're going into something.
Interesting. Maybe, I don't know if others would be interested, but maybe a future episode, I'd be kind of interested in how matrimonial judges become matrimonial judges. That's especially if I were about to be going in front of a matrimonial judge to get divorced, I kind of want to know, how did this person get there? What is their path? You don't have to answer that question right now.
We can have an episode on the Byzantine court system of New York State when I figure it out, and hopefully that'll be by the time I retire. But we'll see. Okay, so that was very much an intro to business valuation. Just thinking about it in terms of what would a willing buyer and a willing seller, what would be paid for this business, with information and all of that, and the three different basic ways of looking at it, either from how much is it making, how much are the assets worth, or how much do comparable businesses sell for, those three things. In a later episode, maybe next week, we'll go a little bit more in depth as to how these things are balanced, but that's sort of the basics of it.
Great. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in, but what should our viewers do if they have a future topic or a future question that they don't feel comfortable putting into the chat right now?
If you have any future topics or future questions for the Unhitching Hour, please send them. We have a Gmail address, unhitchinghour@gmail.com. You can always drop by there, or you can drop by our Facebook page, and our YouTube page, and write a little comment on one of the videos. I monitor all of those. And if you are over by YouTube, you can always subscribe and give us that, and give us a like on a video, and that's it. All right. So I'm Reed. Thank you for joining us on the Unhitching Hour. How the law works when your relationship doesn't. My name is Reed Aronson. I'm a matrimonial lawyer here in Manhattan.
And I'm Vanessa Aronson. I'm Reed's wife. Just here to learn, just like all of you.
And I hope